Hi everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Sachi D'Souza and I'm a part of the Goa Writers Group. Today I'm very honored because I read this book and I'm very happy to be here. This session is on Rupleena Bose's debut book, Summer of Then. She's an author, screenwriter and academic. She serves as an associate professor of English literature at Sri Venkateswara College, University of Delhi. Her debut novel, Summer of Then, explores the life of an aspiring writer navigating the complexities of academia, romance, and societal changes in contemporary India. Thank you so much for being here, Rupleena. And of course, we have Ranjan Das, who's a filmmaker and film academician, specializing in film editing. He has had an extensive career in writing, directing, and editing for both films and television. An accomplished writer, Ranjan authored a weekly column on cinema for Financial Chronicle and has contributed to publications like New Indian Express and Dhaka Tribune. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you.
So I'll, of course, she has just introduced her, and I would first like to ask her about her experience. She has been doing the rounds of a lot of festivals, introducing her book. This is a debut novel, okay? So just tell us something about the different festivals you have been visiting and the experience that we've been through.
That's a very interesting and a very new first question, I must say. Nobody's ever asked me this question before. But yes, the thing is that my novel, Summer of Then, it came out on the 1st of June last year. And since then, actually, I've been around several places. And yeah, it's been wonderful because my story is about a young woman, about 26. When we meet her, she's 26, and we see one decade, which is 10 years, in her life, which is 26 to 36. And in the course of the decade, you also see things in the nation which are changing. And interestingly, that is something that, and it's also written in first person. It's a personal narrative, but it's also about the state of the nation. So it's the personal as well as the political, and it is coming together. You should read it. I mean, I don't want to disclose because it's not a thriller. It's sort of slowly unfolding commentary on class, culture, politics, caste, a lot of things which are seen through the prism of a literature teacher. Now, why I think that is interesting and why that has been a part, everybody's talked about it in the literary festivals, be it Calcutta, be it Delhi, the launch happened, be it Jaipur, is that there are not many stories about contemporary urban India, which is also looking at the feudal within the urban. Like if you look at Delhi, it feels like it's an urban city, but it's not really urban, it's deeply feudal. And my book actually explores this dichotomy. It's that story of this dichotomy seen through the girl, and that girl could be anyone actually. And you also sort of see it through one decade, which is 2010 to 2020. And through that you look at the seasons as well, seasons and cities changing through through that one decade in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, before I proceed to ask you about the narrative technique that you've adopted, okay, can you very briefly tell us, give us the synopsis so that people can connect to the discussion, the synopsis of the story?
So it's basically set across 3 cities. It's Calcutta, Delhi, bit of Mumbai, and Edinburgh. So essentially, actually I think I just gave the synopsis, but so it's this woman and who's toying between writing, teaching, and earning a livelihood. And it's also about the lack of choices. It's also about the impossibility of sometimes being a writer for a middle-class person, because you're constantly struggling with obviously money, with obviously income. So it's also a lot about livelihood, the impossibility of producing, of of practicing art and culture in a country like India, where both of them are not seen at par. They're not in the economic, wheel of things. It's not like it's not economically prudent. You're often told that you study science or study like engineering and study. Nobody tells you like, read literature. I would tell myself, but generally people will not tell a kid that, okay, read literature, become a writer. You're always scared because will it translate? Will it translate to an economically safe life without, family income, or without a trust fund, or without, some sort of support? So I think that is something, that is a struggle which this character is actually toying with, which is the need to be an artist and the impossibility of the difficulty of a young woman to be an artist in a country like that, in a country like India, where you need a certain kind of background and backdrop and upbringing. So it's also about that question of choice, where we talk about choice, but actually there is no choice. You sort of go with the flow. You go with whatever you're supposed to meant to do in terms of study hard and study harder and do your MPhil and PhD, and whether you want it or not. So I think that the whole story sort of carries that anxiety and that inability to find a resolution. There is a resolution, of course, in the end, but it's also a coming of age novel. So in a way, if you look at the conventional Bildungsroman, like Dickens made the Bildungsroman the most popular with your Oliver Twist and David Copperfield, the whole idea of a young working class boy sort of who's going to the big city and finding the city and somewhere becoming the artist or the gentleman or the cultured person he wanted to become. The Bildungsroman is always a male, a boy. And I think that is one of the things. Of course, there is Jane Eyre, and I'm not negating that. But in contemporary writing, I also wanted to look at, sort of rework the coming of age novel and rework the form of the Bildungsroman as to how does it work with the Bildungsroman if you have a woman at the center. And of course, this is an older woman. She is not a classic. It's not a Dickensian space of migrate. Whereas in post-industrial revolution, you're migrating from the marshes into the city. But there is an element of migration here as well. And that's one of the things I do. And so if I have to actually look at my novel in 3 lines, I would say it's a coming of age novel, yes, but it's also a reworking of the Bildungsroman form. And Bildungsroman, where a woman is a central character, because you don't actually find a first person female narrative going through the journeys of life and also traveling out because and finding herself. And that was one of the reasons I also wanted to write this kind of a narrative, because I just thought that it would be interesting.
Okay, when you talk about Bildungsroman and the form, what I found when I was reading it, the narrative technique or the structure, I'll just quote from an interview of the famous filmmaker called Money Call, which was conducted by Nasreen Munni Kabir for Scroll a couple of years ago. Money Call is no longer alive. So he distinguished between epic structure and dramatic narrative. And dramatic narrative follows basically a unidirectional kind of movement where you have a flawed character trying to pursue some kind of a goal, okay? Whereas according to Mr. Manikal, epic structure doesn't have a unidirectional kind of an approach, okay? The narrative branches out into different areas, different zones, and sometimes we tend to forget the main plot. Of course, we have a main plot here. It's not that you don't have a main plot. Okay, it's about the woman protagonist. Okay, so why was it conscious choice to move away from this kind of a narrative structure? Because I've just completed lessons from chemistry. Yeah. Lessons in chemistry, which has a kind of a very powerful protagonist, a woman who kind of, no-nonsense kind of a woman who pursues her objective. But after that, I'm reading your novel. It's an entirely different approach.
Yeah.
Hear me now? You can hear me? Okay. So it branches out,
Yeah.
So why that narrative? It's just an observation, which I found quite unique. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was very clear, because I was writing something else before that, which was a third person narrative. And that was a moment when I needed to rework on that. And it was a draft which I needed to look at. And that was the time, it was 2020. I remember the years of the pandemic, and I was in Aldona, Goa, very, very quiet little village. And I had to go back to that first, the novel which I had written and edited. And somehow I just felt that, okay, like something has changed, the air has changed, something about the world has changed. And I could not go back at that moment to that novel anymore. And I just wanted to write something entirely different. And because it was April 2020, you were not meeting people, you were not like sort of, the whole thing was like you meet, you stay 6 feet apart, or, that you're not sharing a room like this, sharing air was something which was not done, it was not safe, it was not healthy. And that made me think of disease, and it made me think of air, and it made me think of the decade which had gone by, and how 2010 to 2020, where it ends, and mine is not a pandemic novel at all, it's just, it ends at 2020 March, actually. But that made me think of that, what is it about a decade that, that sort of, that's so meandering, but at the same time, it's something which is, which if when you try to encapsulate a decade, it's always too much and too little. I mean, so much has happened, particularly I thought in the decade between 2010 and 2020, to me, India had changed. To me, most of, the India that I knew it, or, the cities the way that I knew it before 2010 was no longer the same. And I thought that somewhere I needed to sort of put it, capture it, document it. I needed to tell the story. And that to me was the plot. So I was very clear that it is not a plot-oriented novel. Yeah. I don't want to write a plot. I mean, I'll write a plot-oriented novel when I write a plot-oriented novel. Mine was essentially broadly about memory. And it's about movement of time, and it's about cities changing, and it's also about seasons. So I think that is something that I started in April 2020, that okay, this is where I go. And let's see how this decade unfolds for this girl. So honestly, even I had thoughts, but I didn't really chart out the entire narrative, but it came along as I went. I mean, of course, everybody has notes, everybody has ideas as to how the decade will go, but it had to be this person's progression, change, learning, disappointment, awakening, and that was, all of that had to be captured in one decade, which is actually 10 years. It's quite a bit, but when you look back, it's nothing. So that was one
it's not only about a decade. You've also referred to the partition. Okay, you have also referred to the Gujarat riots. Okay, then you've also referred to the anti-Sikh riots in Delhi, which happened in 1984. So as you said, it's about memory also. It's not about this girl's experience of the decade. Okay, and all these things were building up towards this particular decade. It's a very transformative decade. What we are living through, even now we are living through that.
Correct.
Okay, so
memory is actually a very important part of that, because that's what you do, right? When we try to remember our lives, it's like saying self-writing, that I'm writing an autobiography. So you start with like, when I was a child, I did this. You don't really remember everything. It's photographs, what people tell you, your idea of yourself, the dolls that you have, the objects in your house. So you are writing yourself. So self-writing or autobiography is also, we talk about this as truth and fiction. There is an element of fiction in everything. We are constantly constructing. And memory is a very vital part of that construction. So actually, a lot of, there is a there's a subplot of partition in my novel, which I'm not talking about broadly, but that is something which sort of helps in the resolution of the primary character. And also because you cannot talk about Delhi without talking about partition. You cannot talk about a lot of cities in India without referring to the past of the cities. And that's where, the importance of memory in a way comes in if you're looking at a city, basically, in today, contemporary India.
Okay, talking about cities, you have spoken about 3 cities, Delhi, okay, and Calcutta, and Bombay, and Edinburgh. Now, what I observed, of course, Delhi is a very brash city, as it comes across, very aspirational, very brash. Okay, but when it comes to Calcutta, what I figured out, all the characters, they have some kind of. I've listed down the names. For example, the girl's boyfriend Nikhil. His father is an ex-journalist. Okay, who writes a column on the heritage of Calcutta. Okay, then you have Nikhil. This guy is called Nikhil. Nikhil's neighbor is a woman who's an artist. Okay, Zafar is a theater and film director. His girlfriend is an actress. Nikhil himself is a camera person. Then there's Rahman, the mad artist. Then Ram, the photographer. So all these characters are involved in the creative pursuits. Okay, so don't you think it's something, when people talk about Calcutta, immediately they connect it to, quote unquote culture. So it's a kind of it's just my observation. Doesn't it stand the risk of being, stereotypical? You're kind of portraying the city with peopling the city with characters who are all connected to some form of art or the other.
Yeah, no, very interesting observation. No, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely deliberate. There's no chance element
It's a
in
deliberate
it.
thing?
Of course,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
because that's the universe I want to explore. Because for me, remember, I'm starting with a woman who's a literature teacher who wants to be a writer.
Right.
So obviously, the universe that she's attracted to, which is not Delhi and Calcutta, has to be this like the small little thing. It's like, there's so many things, and you're just looking at just this small little pocket, and it seems like the most liberating and attractive thing. So that is why she's looking at Calcutta, and it starts with spring in Calcutta, and she's looking at this universe of people who, some of them are artists, some of them are someone is a journalist, but journalist is a very sort of I can tell you that most of my family members who live in Calcutta, if you look at their neighborhood, like 50% would be like journalists,
I know.
So, so definitely, but I don't think it's a stereotype at all, because actually the stereotype is the non-artistic. It's the smaller segment of people who are choosing different things, which are unconventional choices. That is what I'm trying to also look at, because my protagonists are cinematographers and film directors. So obviously their friends are going to be
Right.
in that.
She moves around in a particular circle.
in a
She's
circle.
comfortable.
Yeah.
She's
But
comfortable.
her father is not. Her father works for a tire.
Yeah, the
protagonist's
father
works for a
wasn't-
tire company. So, which is not liberating for her at all. So, which is why she wants to be liberated by people who are not like her family. Not as middle class or regular or ordinary by her family.
But the father was in Delhi for a long time, 35 years. When he was working in the tire factory, that was Delhi. Yeah.
That was Delhi.
Okay.
But still, I mean, it's a Bengali at the same
Okay.
time.
What about Bombay?
Bombay is a very small segment in my book, actually, and essentially because when you move through seasons, you can't. I wanted to talk about monsoon, and you really can't talk about monsoon in India unless you're talking about Bombay or Goa, of course. So that's why the segment on Bombay is this short segment where she goes for a little bit, and that's where sort of monsoon arrives. I'm happy to read a segment actually, just
please.
to get a sense.
Yeah.
I'll read a little bit from the beginning just to give a sense of the characters, and then. Nikhil and Zap were film directors. Zap directed stage plays and films. Nikhil was trained as a cinematographer and directed films. That spring, Zap had just moved back to Calcutta after a few years of trying to permanently live in Germany. Calcutta was also Nikhil's hometown. Zap did not speak about his reason of moving back, but I remember Nikhil telling me that the Art Council, which had promised funding for Zap's long-term stay, had backed off. I heard them speak of everything except Germany and understood that both of them did not like to speak about their disappointments or betrayals. Nikhil told me about Zap's work when we were on in a taxi on our way to Zap's house. I was looking at the rear view mirror and wearing my 307 orange organza lipstick. The orange was like the flame of the winter fire made by the security guards huddled during Delhi winters. I rolled it twice on my lips. The taxi driver looked underage to drive. He was so thin that he could barely fill the large bucket seat. He tried to get a conversation out of Nikhil, the kind of conversation that gave a semblance of class equality. But Nikhil did not relent in these situations. I tried to make up for Nikhil's abruptness like I usually did. The driver had to drop us at the entrance of the lane where Zap lived, where a crowd of people stood waiting. He told us helpfully that it was for a temple that had a good rumor network of wish fulfillment. He said he knew of someone who got the job after many years of unemployment only when he had tied a thread at the temple. I had read in the papers that for one peon's post at a government office, 8,000 postgraduate candidates had applied. Merit seemed like an illusion that only belonged to the privileged. I remember reading somewhere that students had stood in the sun for 8 hours to collect a form for a coaching center. One of them died of a heat stroke, two fell very ill. Did the rest of them go through to the college? They must have all prayed. So I was telling you about Zap. Nikhil cleared his throat like he did when he said what he did not intend to actually say. Zap started directing stage plays only when he was in college. He was invited to take over a big musical production of Alice in Wonderland by the British Theatre Company that wanted to bring the expensive theatre experience to India. Zap hated the idea, but he wanted to move out of Calcutta, Nikhil added. Anyway, that was a decade back. Zap moved from theatre into films and is now back to Calcutta. He will probably work through both art forms. Can you believe he barely visited the city the decade he was abroad? Nikhil continued the conversation while we passed the queue of people waiting to make their wish. I had not seen any play or film made by Zap, but I had been told that he had been making films since he was 15. They had shown at all the big film festivals in Berlin, New York, and Sydney. You should know that Zap is very good at making people do exactly what he wants them to do. He is known to be a very manipulative human being. An hour later, sitting in Zap's house, I understood why Nikhil wanted me to hear those words. It was like the warning sent out by weather departments to fishermen after the cyclone had descended over the ocean.
Yeah. Okay, there's a very interesting episode in your novel concerning this girl from Ria's friend, the girl from Manipur. She's getting married, and the makeup girl comes and does her makeup and makes her look like a non-Northeastern, and she's furious. And she goes to the washroom and washes off the entire makeup. Okay, so could you tell us something about that? I mean, the representation of the Northeast. How they are mainstreamed, quote unquote mainstreamed by people belonging to popular culture. Or that's the popular perception. Okay, so could you elaborate or say something on that?
So essentially, because my book is about agency and also about the way cities behave, and we know that a lot of Indian cities, particularly Delhi, does not behave very well with the non-homogeneous. They want homogeneous faces, they want homogeneous colors, they want homogeneous choices. And in a way, this character, her name is Viola basically, she is the protagonist's friend and she's getting married. And what happens is that, in marriages that there's a mehendi ceremony. And of course, like a mehendi ceremony is like a mainstreamization of what we understand as wedding. And there's a beautician who comes and she basically makes her features entirely like North Indian. And this woman, unlike, and that's where agency is. And in a way, Viola is described, and this act of Viola of rubbing away all her makeup and remaining the way she is, a natural look, is to also show that she's not to be dominated upon. She's not somebody who's also like the protagonist. She's much more firebrand, she's much more conscious of what she's trying to do, and she's much more determined in her choices. And that's why, in a way, it's like also retrieving autonomy from other people. It's also retrieving autonomy from from those people who sort of don't see you as different, who don't allow you to be different, I guess. Yeah, and that's why I think I had this.
Yeah, one of the themes that I found out was the theme of displacement. The people, for example, your protagonist, she does not have a sense of belonging. She cannot connect to Delhi. She comes to Calcutta. She's at a loss in Calcutta. Of course, she finds out some relationship. She enters into a relationship with Zap. Okay, so can you tell us something about this theme of displacement or migration?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's also urban displacement. Actually, we must talk about, like, a lot of us, you live in a city that I just realized that somebody right now in the author's lounge were just saying that that she uses some software for some AI software. I'm like really vague about AI. I have no idea what AI is, but some software for editing. She said that because English is not our language, right? So I don't use this. So I don't. I'm an English writer, but I'm not fully comfortable. And then I thought but then what about somebody like me? Like, English is my language. I mean, good, bad, ugly. I'm not sure whether the notion of that our city, our language, our culture is something which is very problematic, because your our and my our is actually not the same. So I think that is something which I just want to mention, that, the fact that belonging to a language, to a culture, to a city is very fraught in modern times. You really can't be one person. I mean, you can't have like one language, one city, and you're always displaced. You're displaced in your choices, you're displaced in your head. You might want to be here, but you are actually elsewhere. You're speaking multiple languages. You might think in one language and sort of, like work in another. So, displacement of one's, or trying to belong to one singular thing is something that I always think about. That, can you belong to one singular things, one singular caste, identity, culture, sexuality? All of those things are very, very fragmented in modern times. I mean, you might want to be so many people, so many roles that you inhabit. And I think that is where she's not comfortable with. And I wouldn't say she's not comfortable. She's not like, it's also people without roots who you might have like lived in like one place for 15 years, but you might not have grown roots there. So I think that whole idea of rootedness and rootlessness, particularly in modern anonymous cities, is something that I wanted to explore through the characters of these young people, because it's also like fairly, people in their 30s and 40s. Some people have lived forever, the primary characters, 2 of them have lived in the same city forever but decided to move away. One person is like, has also like sort of is constantly trying to move, not belong to one place. So that is our everyday reality, and that defines the way we look at the world. And I think I wanted to sort of capture that.
Okay. Yeah. So, do you have any questions before I ask my questions? Any observations or anything you want to talk about with her about the novel, whatever?
Yeah. As a woman writer, ensure you circulate and others like your book.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually completely different. I mean, I've been told by almost everybody in fact, when the book was picked up by the agent, through the process of publishing, that, you don't get these books at all. You have it when you are looking at like a Sally Rooney in the West, but the moment it comes to Indian cities, because the dichotomy is so hard in India, right? You cannot even have a clear, clear urbanity, complete urbanity is not there. It's not fully urban, actually. So everything which is urban is also feudal. Like I said, everything which is sort of peaceful is also violent. So there's a lot of violence, and that's something, the everyday nature of violence and violation is something that I also write about, and which I think a lot of women writers are writing about, definitely. But, you also have to look at contemporary spaces, which are very different. They're not, I mean, they're very, like, there's a lot of unsaid going on. They're very sort of subtle in their discriminations. They are very subtle in their violations sometimes. And I think that's something women writers sort of get into the underbelly of these things. So even as a protagonist, because she wants to be a writer, which is why her observations are very important, because she's observing more than anybody else, because she can see a lot of things. She can see the anger in somebody. She can see the class disparity, which is causing, like certain various things, various events are unfolding. So she can see all of those things, and that's the perspective of the woman writer, even in the protagonist herself, I think.
Shed some light on your person, the publishing and.
Yeah, so essentially, after you finish your first or second draft, I would say finish your first draft, let the manuscript sit for some time, and then like go towards the second draft. That's the time you should look for an agent. Now, agents basically, it's sort of not that easy to find, but it depends. They're all there in internet, and agents, you require agents for literary fiction. Even for non-fiction, you can pitch directly to the publisher, but agents sort of take the book and do it to the publisher, so you don't have to be bothered with that. It's almost necessary to have an agent these days. You cannot directly approach a publisher. So the agent is going to take the book, but the agent will also work with you. Work through drafts and look at what works. certain segments are too long, then remove those, make it tighter, so that when it's sent to the publisher, there is no back and forth, either a yes or a no. So, and everybody gets a lot of no's, but eventually I think it does work out. So I think a key point in this entire journey is patience. That one has to be like really patient about the whole thing, and you have to obviously keep working, keep writing, redrafting. That really helps.
Okay, when you're talking about agents, do we have this concept of agents in India? Of course, in America we have agents, and it's very difficult to get an agent in America. Okay, everybody has an agent, even singer, the performer, whoever. But is it something there in India, or is something new?
No, literary fiction, you cannot be published without an agent. It's rare in India.
You cannot directly approach a publishing house.
No, most often you'll get a no, and it's not advisable as well. It is advisable. I mean, any contemporary writer you look at, they will all have agents. They might not tell you, but they'll all have agents, because directly approaching the publisher is like sending a cold email. You don't know whether they'll read. It'll go to their trash can. They'll be bothered. So agent it's their job. So it is their job. It's like an entire, what do I say, like community of people working. So it's their employment. So they have to also stay employed, right? So you have to, and in fact, in the last 10 years or so, it is like that in India with literary fiction. I'm not talking about like self-published and, like mythological fiction and all that. Okay. Literary fiction for mainstream, it requires an agent. Non-fiction, sometimes you can just set the proposal and you're lucky, it works out. There's a lot of luck factor otherwise. With agents, it's at least a defined process, I think.
I have a question. Yeah. So regarding your book, how long did you take to write it? That's my first question. Second question, what are you currently reading? And my third question is, how important is the publishing house, like where you get published? So 3 questions.
Okay, I'll break that into three components. So as far as your first question is concerned, okay, I'll add to that. Okay, so what was the genesis of this novel? What was the genesis of the idea? Why did you decide to write a novel that you have written? There must have been a trigger, isn't it?
So which actually I explained right at the beginning, that because the decade had changed, I wanted to look at the decade through the lens of the the quietness of the pandemic, and that was the genesis of the idea. Sorry, what was the first one? Yeah. So how long did you? I didn't take very long, I would say, because I think one of the reasons was because it was 2020. There were lots of things we were not doing. We were not going out. We were not doing a lot of like unnecessary things that you do, right? So there was a lot of silence. I also would say that living in Aldona, because I live in Goa, it really helped, because there's just not many distractions. So the distraction has to be the distraction of your mind, right? So I took about, I think I would say 9 months, 8 months, April I started, November I finished, whatever it was, first draft. And then I waited for a couple of months, I did a second draft and I sent to the agent. The time it took was because then the second wave came and then the Omicron came. Otherwise, when they started sending it out, it actually worked really fast. But the middle part was like, everybody was falling sick, and it was just a very bad time, I think for publishing, for sending out books. But anyway, so I sent it to an agent after that, after around, I think 2021. And then the agent got back and we did a couple of drafts, and then she started sending it. Publishing house matters in the sense, look, I mean, I think I was quite lucky. I mean, she sent it to Penguin and Penguin picked it up, and that's a good thing. But otherwise there were several. There's HarperCollins, there's Aleph, there's Speaking Tiger. So there is various scales of big and small. And honestly, it doesn't really matter. What matters is like it should be out. Because it will give you freedom and it will liberate the writer, and you can just move on to your next story. So my honest advice is that not to always worry about publishing house. I didn't even think. I mean, the first was Penguin, and they said, listen, we are saying yes. I said, yeah, say yes. Had it been any HarperCollins or Aleph, I would have still said yes. So it's just a matter of chance and whatever, fate or whatever. But what matters is like it should be out and you move on to your next story, I think. I mean, if you want to write the next one in a way. Yeah. Third.
What are you
I'm currently reading The Handmaid's Tale. I don't know whether people have you seen, it's Margaret Atwood, and I'm reading Handmaid's Tale. I'm also reading this Samantha Harvey, who won the Booker for the Space Orbital. So I'm midway through that, but actually I've abandoned it. And I just finished this writer called Patrick Modiano. He's a French writer. He won the Nobel a few years back, and it's very French cinema, the way he writes. It's called If You Get Lost in the Neighborhood. So I just finished it, and I'm reading Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, because somehow I hadn't read it before that way.
Okay, what have been your literary influences? You are also a professor assistant professor of English, teaching in associate professor of English, teaching in a Delhi University. So you have been associated with literature. You must have been a reader, of course. Okay, so what have been your literary influences from childhood, from since?
I'm always reading actually. I'm one of those people. But some of the writers for this one also, some of the influences are James Joyce, Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, which is again a Bildungsroman, a young man trying to be an artist. And that's one of the things I thought that, okay, we've had enough of the young man being an artist. Now let's move on. World has moved on. So that is one of the things, but it's one of my favorite. Dubliners is a huge favorite. Virginia Woolf is someone I really like. Elena Ferrante in modern stories I really like. D.H. Lawrence I like a lot. Rachel Cusk is a huge favorite, contemporary British writer. Deborah Levy is a huge favorite. Again, they write in this first person narrative, very simple stories. The drama is in the everyday, the drama is in the very soft things, and also women protagonists. So, and in fact, I would say everybody should read a Deborah Levy novel, or even the autobiography. She's got something called living autobiographies, which is like non-fiction, which reads like fiction, in a way. So that's somebody who I read. There's Javier Marias, who was a Spanish writer who I really enjoy. Marquez, many.
Yeah, okay.
So
difficult.
It's
very difficult to,
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. See, I was writing something in third person before, and because I had to separate myself from the new thing which I was writing without editing the previous one, it was a conscious choice of using first person. Now the question is first person, like the usual one is a reluctant fundamentalist or an Arvind Adiga, where the first person is a working class person who can be a killer. I consciously did not want that. We've had, and that's very tricky, the question of representation. But instead, what you do, what at least my strategy was, and the character is not similar to me or anything, just the only thing that I took was the role of the English teacher, because a literature teacher notices things, and a professor also has a certain kind of wisdom and a philosophical orientation which I wanted to bring to the narrative, which is why I chose a temporary, who doesn't even have a permanent job, English teacher, and it's almost like putting out actually a role. It's like making a character, like role playing, like audition, like giving an audition. So when I had this character in mind, and then I started writing, so everything what she would do. So it's almost like an actor, doing a monologue. So that was the strategy I did, I think. Which worked fluidly, yes. Because the moment you're putting it on somebody like, this person and her monologue, it's much easier because you're separating yourself, you're fluid, and it's her language, and you've just taken the role, basically.
What is your advice for people who want to publish one day? All right, they are in the process of reading, writing. What's your advice?
My only advice, which is the most cliched advice in the universe, is to read a lot and to write daily. Because unfortunately, you feel that, the pleasure is in writing. The pleasure is after you finish the book and it's out, and then you're like craving, oh my God, suddenly you're free. You don't have anything to do, anything to do in the physical sense, but you don't have this universe, imaginary universe which you are inhabiting. So I would say that take out whatever hours you have and just inhabit that imaginary universe, because it's that universe which is going to take you to its final goal. So my only advice is even if it's 1 hour, one should just go to that universe, sit on the desk. It's like any job, any clerical job. Just get on the desk, inhabit that universe for 20 minutes, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and then maybe go elsewhere, I think.
What's your process like when you're writing a book and when you're done with the book and possibly working on another? What's your process like?
My process is this. I try to sit on it every day. I might not
Morning
write.
or evening?
Sorry?
Do you have a timing that you do
No,
it?
no, but no, I do. I have discovered that morning is the best time, because then you're not bogged down by 100 things, about the day and food and, how the day is unfolding. The first few hours, and so, it's again a very cliched thing to say, but all writers have said that, and I've experimented with all times of the day, and I've realized that it works better. First thing in the morning, slightly fresh mind, and you might not write anything for like 10 days actually, but you're in that universe. Now it's like entering a room and just sitting in that room and just being with those people, and something will come. 10 days later you will write. It's like a given, I think.
There's somebody has said, "Now you have to sit in front of the blank page till your forehead bleeds." Okay, so you cannot wait for inspiration. You have to be at it. Whether you're able to write it or not, you have to be at it every day. There's nothing called inspiration. It's like an office work. I believe I'm not very
That's true.
mistaken.
Yeah, that's true. It is like office work, really.
It's like an office work.
But it's office work. It's like an office work in the act of it, but actually it's not. It's like a leap of faith. So you go and sit on the desk and the blank page, but then the magic will happen. It simply will happen. You will fall in love with your characters. New people will come, and sometimes you will be completely detached from your immediate life because you're in this another universe. So magic will happen, but for that you have to be like a office worker.
It's a rigorous process. I mean, I don't know how many of you are here writers or aspiring to be writers. Okay.
And reading is like, that nothing like constantly reading fiction. It really works. It works in a subconscious level, actually, I would say. Reading the stories that you like, and don't read what you don't like. Read what you like. I mean, you like it. I think it's okay to also drop if you don't like something.
Just a personal question about your writing process, because writing, the creative process is always very interesting, and different writers, different artists have different approaches. So do you, as a writer, draw up a outline, or you have a map, and so that it helps you when we write screenplays, before we start writing the scenes, individual scenes or dialogues, we know what's the story about, where it's going to end, what's going to be the climax, okay, and we proceed accordingly. But to arrive at that outline, of course, we have to work out the story. It's a rigorous process, okay. So do you work like that? Do you work from an outline? Do you work from a map? Do you have a map? You know what's going to happen, and then you fill in the details, or you work very organically?
No, I don't work with a map at all. I
Okay.
mean, no map. I just know, because map doesn't work for me, because it's just too many. Also, there are all kinds of fiction. Look, if you're writing historical fiction, you'll probably have to make a map.
Right.
There are too many details. If you like having detective fiction, which I've tried writing, I'm trying a detective fiction, and only to realize that I just don't like formulas. I don't want to stick to that formula, so it's just not something which gives me pleasure, simply. It's a craft, it's a formula. If you learn it, you will do it. There's no problem with that. Red herring, the whole idea of the who done it. So it's a craft, and I've taught detective fiction for many years, so I've tried to understand this craft also very well. But I think what gives me the most pleasure is, of course, you have something in your head. You broadly have the set of characters, and you broadly have the scenario, I think, and then like scenario being the milieu, I would say. The central character, the milieu, and the core philosophy. For me, it is like the core thought of the, of the story. And you start with that, and then you sort of go forward. And as all, who was it who said, that very famous writer, the novel, I think Rachel Cusk said that, the novel is almost like a building. You have to build it slowly, and then you get out and see if the building is standing on its own. So I think that's the process I follow, actually.
Okay, so when you're writing a chapter, you do not know what's going to happen in the next chapter. Is that so?
I know subconsciously, but I don't want to pin it down. I broadly know. I know the overall thing, what is going to happen. I know, it's like, how do I say it? It's very difficult, because I have the overall philosophy in my head, right? I mean, I know what this book is going to be about. That this is a story, say, about a young man who left a city and did not want to come back, and until he did, something like that. If I have this thought, and why does he come back? Why do people return?
Right.
Or why do people leave? If that is the core thought, then that's the thought I go with.
Okay, so you have some kind of a spine. It's a thematic spine.
It's the spine that I have, and the central character that I have, and the rest unfold, actually.
Okay.
Even in screenplays, I did that.
So when we look at writers, they come from different backgrounds. But as literature students and professors, do you think we are at an advantage?
No, disadvantage. Literature students advantage, professors disadvantage. Because one main thing is that if you're a professor, you're supposed to be a critic. And I'm a terrible critic, I think. And I think, you're supposed to be an academic, which is making things, sometimes writing in a very difficult language. And thankfully, that was something that I was very clear that I don't want to do. So, and there's also the rigor of giving that much time in your day. I mean, in India, I would say, but across the world, if you look at all writers are actually, the most of the day job that the writers have is the teaching job, of literature, because it's the closest that you come to. But at the same time, you have to stop being a critic to be a good writer. That's something, because you'll be constantly criticizing your work. You'll never move ahead. You'll be always thinking that, this is like
Enough.
this is
So
not
that
good
is where I am currently. I look at my own work and I'm like, it's not good enough, and and as a result I've evolved, but it's never good enough.
That's a tough one. But to that, my suggestion is that why don't you write a whole chunk and then see whether it's good enough. See the narrative through without seeing it through, like as I said, until the building stands, and that's a very tricky thing, because if the building falls, then you have to start all over again. But as I said, I'm not very, I scrap. That's one thing I do, that even if I've written these words and I love it, I'll scrap it. Because if the building doesn't stand, it doesn't stand, actually. You just have to, it has to stand on its own when you walk out of it.
Just a suggestion, if you could do workshops for us one day,
Sure.
we'd love to attend.
Yeah. You can always. She lives in Goa.
And I live in Moira. I'm
You live in
neighbor.
Moira, nice. I live in Aldona.
Who else is a writer here or aspiring writer?
So I had a question. When you were in the process of writing this book,
When you were in the process of writing this, and because it's sort of in the genre of coming of age, did you do research on other coming of age books from India? And how do you feel personally about this particular genre or this particular collection right now in India? Because there are a bunch of these niche novels that you'll randomly find in crosswords and all, but I've never personally picked them up. But your book was something that really, there was something and Deborah Levy-like about it that I immediately sort of gravitated to. But how do you feel about the current genre of coming of age in India right now?
Yeah, I think I couldn't find any coming of age novel, when I was like writing it in 2020, and coming of age, which is like urban, which is like a young woman's story where she doesn't have to do the right things. She's constantly making mistakes. And there's no qualification. And so many people have told me that, oh my God, you make the protagonist like completely unapologetic. I'm like, precisely. Why should one be up? Why because you have this in the West all the time. Like if you like, so I read Sally Rooney after I finished my novel. And the first thing I remember my agent said, oh my God, this is reminding me of Sally Rooney. And then I read it and I realized you actually don't have those novels in India, at that time. I mean, maybe because we have so many other things, which is class and, rural subjugation, all of those things, stories to tell, that somehow we have just missed out on this coming of age on the part of the woman, which shouldn't be also. None of the stories should be missed out. Right.
I think one thing that I noticed about the way that you've been trying to explore the protagonist in the book is that it reminded me of the book Assassin by K.R. Meera. That's a crime thriller, of course, but the woman there, the protagonist, is this simple middle-class woman, and it's placed within this system of class and demonetization and a lot of different things. So I think you'll really relate to that protagonist because she's flawed, she's really complicated, and she's like deeply struggling with this story that's kind of like completely, her life is completely fallen apart. But it's also a really fascinatingly complex portrayal of a woman. So that it reminded me of that also.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have not read the book. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's very interesting that you tell me this because I would immediately now.
No, she's a very popular writer.
No,
Yeah.
she is. I've read one of her books, but I haven't read this one.
That's an
This
incredible
book is available here, most
I'm going to
probably.
pick
Yeah.
it up right away.
Yeah.
Because, but thank you for telling me because I
Yeah.
didn't know. And
No, it's
nobody
an
has,
incredible
and
book.
everybody has said, compared it to the writers in the West, but nobody had picked up this KR Meena point, So,
No, I think you'll find
I'm
relevance.
definitely going to pick it
Yeah.
up. I think 5 minutes are left. You had a question, yeah.
ask you about your format. Now, you like novels, but this morning we had a session on comics on resume. So, would you ever see yourself doing a graphic novel?
Well, I don't draw at all. Yeah. So actually, I did do a short graphic story, which is this friend Arijit Sen. He does this comic books called Comic Sense. So he told me that, write a story and somebody else will draw. So the story is called Sitara, and it came out, I think, last year's January or something, Comic Sense, about an aging actor. So it wasn't the beauty issue, and Vogue talked about it and all of that, about an aging actor. But having said that, I realize it's not my process. I need full control. I cannot, somebody else is drawing, the imagination has to be mine entirely, I think. Yeah, I think we are spilling over to the next session.
You have spoken about Western influences. What about Indian writers? Any writers who could have appealed to you?
No, so many. Like Nilanjana Roy, Arundhati Roy, Amitabh Ghosh, Shadow Lines, huge influence. Manto, Tagore, Ashapurna Devi. I mean, endless. It's endless, actually. It's very difficult when you ask. I mean, you read them all. So, yeah.
Okay, any last question before we end the session? I hope the session has been useful, because of such low attendance, we kind of got a little demotivated, but I'm sure. No more questions?
We had quite a bit of questions. I think usually question answer, nobody asks this many questions. So it's actually quite exciting to engage rather than just like talk. Because how much can you talk on a novel? It's a quiet enterprise, right? You just quietly read a novel. Your pleasure is your own, actually. You can't share it with anyone. I mean, of reading a novel, I think.
That's very true. No, thank you so much, Rupleena. And this has been a really great session. And if you haven't read the book, you absolutely must. As a debut novel, I think it's a really fantastic book. So congratulations and thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you so much.